chairing the event this afternoon. So, Zoe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thanks for those introductory words. It's really encouraging to know that the GLA is taking such an active role in getting us ready for the impacts of what this bill are going to be. I think it's such an important discussion, and it's really great of you to have us here today. And welcome to everybody who's joined us online. I've been told that it's many people have signed up, and I think we've got a really great spread of people who are working on this from all sorts of different angles, because the impacts of this bill are really going to be felt in lots of different ways across our communities. And I think we've got a great agenda here today to really delve into those issues. Hi, my name is Zoe Gardner. I'm an independent migration policy expert, researcher, campaigner at large, and generalised busybody around these issues. And it's a real honour to have been invited here today to chair this panel of absolute experts and brilliant people, and also to participate in the discussion with all of you who are joining online today. So just to reiterate a couple of the things that Debbie mentioned, the discussions today will be under Chatham House rules. So hopefully that means that you can feel really free to express all of your thoughts about this, all of your worries, all of your concerns, all of your ideas as well. We want to focus on the likely impacts of what the bill is going to have. So this isn't necessarily a space to sort of, I know that for some people who've been working in difficult circumstances with vulnerable people for a long time, and this bill feels like a very difficult additional thing to have to deal with. And of course, it is valid to express those feelings, but I think we really want to focus a little bit on what are going to be the outcomes, and as far as possible, what are the positive things that the people in this room, digitally speaking and physically speaking, can do to mitigate some of the bad impacts of this bill, and to strengthen our communities. So to focus on that. There will be, and you're encouraged to use the chat function to send in any questions you have. Got some lovely people in the room here who hopefully will help me and my failing eyesight to see those questions. And I'll try to get to as many as possible, but I may have to group them thematically. If we don't get to your question, there are breakout rooms which are there for discussion. So please do, not worry. We're here to have a discussion today and to hear from everybody and everybody's opinions. So there will be space for you to contribute. So without further ado, I'll just go through the agenda of the day. So we have a panel here today, which is for almost an hour. Then we'll have a short break. And then we're going to go into our thematic breakout rooms. So we have one on children and young people, one on modern slavery and exploitation, and one on homelessness and destitution. Then we have another short break. And then we'll go into the second set of breakout sessions, which are based on sectoral issues. So one on funding, one on health, one on civil society, and one on local authorities. And then we'll come back together, and I'm going to try to synthesize some of the discussion. I'm really hoping to be able to come back with some sort of concrete points, something that can take us forward. And again, focus on what we can do as regards to this issue. So please think about that in your discussions. Give me something to work with at the end there. And then we'll have some closing remarks as well at the end of the day. So I'm going to introduce my panel now. We have a brilliant expert panel. First of all, we have another Zoe, never too many Zoes, Zoe Benselman, who is the legal director at the Immigration Law Practitioners Association. Next, we will hear from Fiona Colley, who's director of social change at Homeless Link. Next, we have Lucilla Granada, who is up on screen, actually, not with us in the room today, but she's the chief executive of Focus on Labour Exploitation, Flex. And then finally, last but absolutely not least, we have the lovely Nazak Ramadan, who is the director of Migrant Voice, which is a charity that focuses on bringing the voices of migrants into this discussion, and the people who will be impacted most severely, obviously, by this bill are migrants themselves. So a really important addition there. So I'm going to try to get everything sorted so that we can get going. We'll start with you, Zoe. So you're going to talk to us a little bit about the legal implications of the bill. So can you tell us a bit about the key changes that the bill makes to legal proceedings for the people who will be impacted by it?
Sure, there's quite a lot of changes it makes to legal proceedings, and tip, none of them are any good. The bill is really quite far-reaching in its effects, and I don't say it lightly, but it represents an assault on the rights of migrants and on the rule of law in the UK. And for those interested in my very detailed views on the legal proceedings and the rule of law, ILPA has detailed briefings that run up to 50 pages on ILPA's website. I thought we might first start with inadmissibility, because this is one of the key things that the bill does. So for most refugees, the bill is a ban on seeking safety in the UK. It will block almost anyone who reaches the UK through means that the Home Office deems irregular on or after the 7th of March 2023 from making an asylum claim in the UK. Instead of providing protection and safety to those people in the UK, they will be detained for 28 days without adequate safeguards to challenge that detention. They can't receive bail in those first 28 days. Existing safeguards for unaccompanied children, families, and pregnant women in detention will be overturned and removed. They will be denied recovery if they're victims of trafficking, and unaccompanied children will be housed in Home Office hotels from which they've already gone missing. The Home Secretary will instead be under a duty to remove anyone who meets the conditions in the bill from the United Kingdom who is an adult. For children, including unaccompanied children, she will have a power to remove them with very limited exceptions. The government also creates a power to decide whether individuals should be treated as adults if they refuse to consent to scientific age assessment procedures, which the Nationality and Borders Act brought in only last year. And they can be treated as an adult if they refuse to consent to those procedures. The government also intends to make it so that if an age assessment is made for a person who comes within the conditions of the bill, including by a local authority who's making that age assessment for the purposes of functions under the Children Act 1989, then that person will have no appeal against that age assessment. And if they try to make a judicial review challenge, that doesn't stop them being removed from the United Kingdom. It doesn't only apply to people who cross the channel on small boats. And I think this is a large part of the rhetoric around the bill, that it's for those who are coming in small boats and to stop and save their lives by stopping them from crossing in small boats. But that's not what the bill does, or at least that's not only what it purports to do. It affects anyone who arrives irregularly on or after the 7th of March 2023, regardless of whether the journey they made was dangerous. The bill will also make any asylum application or human rights claim by a person permanently inadmissible, and including if it's made by a child, including if it's made by a victim of trafficking. Any human rights or asylum claim that is declared inadmissible will not be considered, and there'll be no right of appeal against that decision. So EEA, Swiss, and Albanian nationals can have their claims, including human rights claims, deemed to be inadmissible, and they can be returned to their own countries. As for everyone else who doesn't come within that set of nationalities, their claims will be declared inadmissible. They'll have no right of appeal, but they will essentially be permanently in limbo and unremovable from the United Kingdom. And the reason for that is the United Kingdom at present only has one third country removal agreement, and that is its agreement with the government of Rwanda, which is currently being litigated at the moment in the Court of Appeal, and we're waiting for the Court of Appeal's decision in relation to that agreement. And we don't anticipate that Rwanda is able to accept the hundreds of thousands of people who are likely to be impacted by the bill, according to the Refugee Council's impact assessment.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's helpful. Every time I hear it, it still seems to amaze me. How wide-ranging it is, really. And I think you've touched upon it a little bit. You've mentioned that there are limits to appeal rights, limits to safeguards on detention, and limited bail application rights. But maybe you can just talk us through a little bit how the bill is going to impact access to legal representation in general.
Sure. I think it might be helpful to just lay out some of the context which currently faces legal representatives in the UK at the moment. And to be quite frank, the legal representatives who provide advice and assistance, representation to people seeking asylum in the United Kingdom, people making human rights claim, are already at breaking point. They're overstretched and they have no capacity. There are advice deserts across the United Kingdom, including in England and Wales. There's also a legal aid crisis, and there's a really good reason for that, and that's that legal aid rates haven't risen for the past 15 years. In fact, they were most recently cut in 2011. And I know very recently, many professions across the United Kingdom, and even civil servants themselves, were contemplating going on strike if they didn't receive increases of something like 4.5 to 5%. And we're talking about no increases in legal aid rates since they were set in 2007 and cut in 2011 in this area. And so that means that a legal aid practice is unsustainable and unviable for most representatives practicing in the United Kingdom. What the very real impact that that has on people affected by this bill and migrants more generally in the United Kingdom is that they're unrepresented, apologies, and they have very little access to representation because they cannot afford private representation and they have no access to legal aid representation. And what does the bill do to address this? It does nothing to address it. In fact, it only exacerbates the situation. In addition to making these claims inadmissible, the bill also creates fast-track procedures for suspensive claim processes with really short and unreasonable timeframes for representatives and for applicants to make claims. And it creates more difficult and complex law and policy. And we know that busy, overstretched representatives will have to come to grips with it, in addition to the new procedures which are already going to come into play from the Nationality and Borders Act passed only last year. And so it exacerbates the situation rather than relieving it. The bill does have one legal aid provision in it, but it's dependent on a person receiving a removal notice. And something that we know from the debate, which was in the House of Lords last night, committee stage day 1, it's really unclear when a person is going to receive a removal notice under the bill. There's an assumption that a person can make a human rights or asylum claim on the bill. In fact, large parts of the way the bill is drafted depend on that. However, it's unclear when a person is going to receive a removal notice, which will then be the trigger for them accessing legal advice.
Right, thank you. And yeah, you mentioned that the bill is currently in committee stage in the House of Lords. So what's the likely timescale for this bill to actually start to take effect?
It's a little bit difficult to predict. A little bit of crystal ball gazing is required to answer that, but it's certainly the government's intention to have the bill passed this summer. I recall Penny Mordaunt saying in Parliament earlier this year that they're prepared to sit through the night if necessary to get this on the statute book as swiftly as possible. But a lot of it will depend on timetabling in the House of Lords. So as I said, committee stage day 1 took place yesterday evening and into the night. We have 4 more days of committee stage that take us up until the 14th of June. There will then be report stage, 3rd reading, and then something that's called ping pong, which is not as fun as it sounds, but it's where the bill goes between the House of Lords and the House of Commons if it's amended by the Lords. And all of this would have to take place before the House rises for recess, which is on the House of Commons rises on the 20th of July 2023. So that will be the ultimate date if it was to pass this summer. If not, it will be whenever the House returns and before the King's Speech, which is due to take place on the 4th of November. As to when the provisions take effect, well, that's a really different question because there is a commencement provision in the bill, but not everything in the bill comes into effect on the date that the bill receives royal assent. In fact, very few things do. The entry, settlement and citizenship provisions come into effect on the date the bill passes, and so does the provision which makes first-tier tribunal judges upper tribunal judges, but the rest of the provisions in the bill are to come into effect whenever the Home Secretary decides to lay secondary legislation to bring it into effect.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose some of the impacts was a sort of a ticking time bomb down the line, especially for children as well, who will be eventually denied the possibility of citizenship, even if they were to be born to people in this country who have been deemed inadmissible under these rules as well. So it's actually going to have an ongoing impact as time goes on.
initially when the bill was introduced, it did contain that provision, but thankfully that particular provision was removed. However, other entry, settlement and citizenship provisions would still apply. And so there's definitely things that migrants in the community now need to be thinking about if they arrived on or after the 7th of March, 2023.
That's okay. Good to have one piece of one amendment that's good news in terms of that. But yeah, thank you so much for that overview. Really comprehensive and as everyone can tell, a hugely complex and wide-ranging bill. So one of the key areas that this is going to impact is on homelessness. So Fiona, if we can come to you and maybe just to give us a bit of context about the background, how you think that the current policy environment is impacting on migrants facing destitution in London, and how will the impact of this bill and on asylum seekers deemed inadmissible impact that context.
Thanks very much. Yes. So HomelessLink is the national membership body for homelessness charities in England, and migrant homelessness has been a particular theme of our work over the last, I would say, 3 years now, as our members have been increasingly telling us that more and more of the people that they are supporting are non-UK nationals, and that the challenges that they face are distinctive and different because of policy environment around them. What we see is that in the context of what is already a homelessness crisis, in a situation where, having seen successes of policies during the pandemic in bringing people in being able to end homelessness, in bringing all people in, including non-UK nationals, we are now back seeing homelessness rising rapidly to levels not seen for now sort of 5-6 years. In the last year alone, a rise of 25% in rough sleeping in London and the whole of the UK. And the situation in London today is that around half the people sleeping on the streets of London are non-UK nationals, many of them with no recourse to public funds or with very unclear immigration status, because status is never clear, often not clear. So the work that we have been doing with our members, I think we started out quite hopeful because of everyone in, because of the way that the policy agenda at that time treated everybody as being an important human being that should be supported, to really seeing that situation reversing and finding ourselves with a system that is increasingly designed to be hostile, designed to be unwelcome, designed to push people away. The result of it is that it pushes people to destitution and pushes people into homelessness. So we've seen that through the Nationalities and Borders Act. We've seen that through new regulations that have made rough sleeping a provision that can be used to remove people's status. I'm very pleased we haven't seen those provisions actually used, which is fantastic, and in large part thanks to the campaigning that we've been doing as a sector. But it means that people understand what that system looks like and can be very fearful. What we hear from our members, fearful of approaching services for support. And that is, I think, perhaps one of our big concerns about this bill. Again, whether it becomes fully enacted or not, it is massively contributing again to making the environment more hostile, more fearful, and pushing people away from services. If it does come to be, and as Zoe set out, it may well quite rapidly. We are expecting a very significant rise in destitution and homelessness. The Refugee Council has estimated that 190,000 people over the first 3 years could have their applications deemed inadmissible, but not be removed from this country. Now, perhaps that won't come to pass. That is, of course, the government's claim that they will, in fact, deter people from coming. They will, in fact, remove people, but recent history suggests otherwise. And for our members, that's just an overwhelming idea of how many people could be facing desperate need and with no support, and falling to the third sector, the homelessness sector, to try to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, and what's the capacity like in the sector responding to that?
Yes, I mean this is almost the straw that breaks the camel's back. For homelessness services and the sector, we've had a decade, of course, of austerity, funding cuts, frozen contracts, and then the cost of living crisis most recently has absolutely made the situation even worse. We surveyed our members last autumn to ask them how they were doing as organisations, and half of them said that because of the cost of living, the rising energy bills, rising staffing costs, that they were looking at having to close services. So at the very time that we may most need those services, they themselves are at risk and risk of not being there to pick up the pieces.
So that's been very much the bad news, I suppose. And a lot of this will all support, and among our audience today, I know that there's lots of people from local authorities and the role that they can play within this sort of restitution space. Do you have any positive examples, any ideas of what people can do to mitigate this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that we don't give up and that we are hopeful. I want to particularly encourage people to have a look at the work that we have done at HomelessLink with NACOM, our partners. I'm going to wave if people can see it. Our report, Unlocking the Door roadmap for supporting non-UK nationals facing homelessness, because we have seen some really good practice. The situation, the ways in which local authorities can support non-UK nationals, it's quite unclear and ambiguous. But there are local authorities doing really, really good work, and I would like to commend actually the GLA itself for the work that it has done to commission advice. In particular, advice is crucial, and many local authorities have also commissioned accommodation. There is flexibility within the system, within the Rough Sleeping Initiative, to commission services for people. I think the other piece of good practice that we've seen is that the local authorities that speak out against the hostile environment, the leadership really matters to take the attitude that we're going to do everything that we can and not the least we can get away with. Makes a tremendous difference locally. The boroughs that have declared themselves boroughs of sanctuary, talk about refugees being welcome, that attitude makes a real difference. And so we really want to encourage local authorities to take those attitudes and to be creative, to work with the third sector, with the migrant sector, with the homelessness sector, with the advice sector. I do think together we can be creative. I think together at summits like this, we can make a difference. Hopefully we can resist new legislation that will be so damaging, but it's only by coming together and working together.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and there's very much space in the breakout rooms for those discussions about, what actions, where there are those grey areas where the guidance isn't particularly clear, what are the good practices, and how more local authorities can be those champion local authorities that are protecting people. Thanks so much, Fiona. I'm going to move on to Lucilla now, who's on screen. So I'm going to face over here, right there. Thanks for joining us digitally. Obviously, you work for Focus on Labour Exploitation. It says it in the name what your major concern is, and it's been one of the issues that's got a lot of attention about what's in this bill, is the impact on modern slavery and labour exploitation commitments that we have in the UK. So can you talk us through a little bit that angle of what the bill's going to do?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having us as part of this panel and for organizing this event. As Zoe explained before, the bill will block anybody entering or arriving in the UK via one of the routes that the Home Office will deem as irregular route from accessing any kind of modern slavery protections and from claiming asylum. And so that will make them also subject to detention and removal from the UK. So any victim that will fall within the conditions of the clause 2 of this bill will not receive support for their recovery or protection. But this also will include people that are in the NRM already waiting for a decision to be made on their case and who are in the reflection and recovery period, which is obviously a current obligation for the UK. So when a person
So can you just explain maybe for, I'm sure we have a very knowledgeable audience, but NRM, which is National Referral Mechanism, and the reflection period, what that means in layman's terms. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So the NRM is the National Referral Mechanism. It's the system that is available in the UK for victims of trafficking to access any sort of support, assistance, and protection in the UK. And so the first phase is, well, the potential victim needs to be identified by a first responder as such, and then that first responder will make a referral to a competent authority that will make decisions over that application. Currently, there are two stages. So you would have the reasonable grounds decision stage, which is a preliminary decision. And then at this stage, when people are recognized as potential victims of trafficking, they are giving allowed a period of recovery and reflection. At the moment is 30 days. That is also an obligation under international law. And then the second stage would be a conclusive grounds decision that is done by one of the two competent authorities, so the state, on whether they are recognized as a victim. And so at the moment, the point I'm making is that the clause around banning a victim access to protections under the modern slavery framework will apply also to those waiting already in the system of protection. So all the people that have already expressed consent that will fall within the conditions of that clause will also be banned from accessing support. And that means that this bill will remove the obligation to grant the potential victim leave to remain, and it will allow these individuals to be removed from the UK before a conclusive grounds decision is made. So essentially, what this means for victims is that it will deprive them from crucial protections. As Fiona mentioned just before around accessing services, it will also increase fear of the authorities, because obviously this will put victims at risk of falling into a situation of being in limbo, as was described before, or being detained. And it will make victims less able to exit the situation overall, and it will prevent people from escaping situations of exploitation and from reporting perpetrators. So in turn, it will increase the chances of continued exploitation and re-trafficking. So yeah, overall, the bill will empower traffickers. This will give them a new tool that they can use to coerce people into exploitation. And it will also force victims of trafficking and modern slavery to choose between remaining in a situation of exploitation or facing what we've mentioned already, indefinite limbo or detention and removal from the UK.
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously that's more bad news. I feel like every one of you is giving us some of that, but I suppose the next question is, if people are going to be denied that route to protection, what ways can civil society organisations, and maybe some of the people who are present on this call, best support victims if they're not entitled to that route of protection? What can we do to mitigate these impacts, and what pathways are available to us?
Yes, I mean, civil society is, as Fiona was mentioned already, there are avenues for local authorities and civil society in general to provide support. The situation, it's difficult to remain positive when it comes to the changes that are going to be introduced with this bill, because of the complexity of the situation, and Zoe already mentioned the likely numbers of thousands of people that will be sort of in limbo, sort of in an indefinite situation where they can't really access support to the established frameworks, but also equally not able to be removed, and so it is a huge challenge. Organizations can, continue to highlight the UK's legal obligations towards victims, and again find, alternatives to provide support to people, both in terms of their, physical and mental health, risk of homelessness, and wider welfare needs. But it is a challenging landscape, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lucilla. So we're going to come back to sort of a bit of a discussion with everybody, but just last give the floor a little bit to Nazak. Lucilla just mentioned that there are victims who are already in the trafficking system who are going to be impacted by this bill, have protections taken away from them. We know, the migrants that you work with directly, some of them already in the asylum system who arrived since the 7th of March this year, will also be the people directly impacted by this bill. So among the people that you've spoken to, and I know you've done some research, what is the view of the people who are going to be impacted by this on the new legislation, and how do they think it's going to impact them? How are they feeling?
Thank you. So before I came this morning, I had a meeting with a group of asylum seekers, and I asked them, I said, I'm going to speak at this event. How do you feel about this bill? And one of them said to me, it's brutal. It's brutal and inhumane. I left because I had to leave. I needed to leave for my life. And along the journey, I lost some of my friends. Some of them were drowned and killed. Some of them were stabbed. They were my friends. We came here for protection. And, we're human beings and treated like this. I mean, people were very upset. Another person said, it's inhumane. I've sold my house and my car to flee for my life. And I had no other options. I was forced to leave. And there was no other route for me to take apart from this irregular route, this dangerous route. I put my life in danger because I need to save my life. And I didn't have access to any other way. If there was another way, I would have done that. So, I mean, for me, it's important to talk about who are those people that we're talking about, who are those people that are going to be impacted by this bill. And in the past 2-3 months, we spoke to around 200 asylum seekers living in London hotels, just to find out from them what's their situation. Everybody's talking about them. And some of them came to us. They said, please give us a voice. Did you know how we're living? And just to explain, maybe before I start, tell you a little bit about who those people are. Most of them are from countries like Sudan, Iran, Eritrea, Syria, Afghanistan. We're talking about people really fleeing wars and persecution. And we're talking about people, once their application asylum is processed, the success rate is very high. So these are the people we're talking about. And this is how now we're treating them. And this is how we are trying to criminalize them for exercising their rights under international law to seek protection. There are people turning at our door to ask for protection. And right now, the way we treat them in hotels, they're not in luxurious hotels. Some of them are sharing room with 10 people or more. Some of them are forgotten. They can't access, they cannot work, they can't study, they can't access any support. They're forced to stay in hotel, no communication from the home office for a year and a half or 2 years or whatever. No access to information, no access to legal support. I mean, this is, those people have already been vulnerable by their experience coming to the UK before coming to the UK. And this is what happened when they arrive here. So I think it's just people need to understand who those people are we're talking about. And they include families and children who are in hotels having to live on foods, hotel foods, for a year or a year and a half and 2 years, including school children and people are becoming ill. I mean, we've seen 1 or 2 people, one person said he developed diabetes from the food, stage 1, and this, changed into stage 2. His GP went actually to that to say, what are you feeding those people? And those people have no options, have no choice. They rely on us. So these are the people we're talking about. And, whoever, the people coming up with those policies are out of touch. Absolutely out of touch with the people who are impacted by those policies. So I think for us, it's really important to think of those human beings who need to flee. But also for me, what angers me, someone as originally from Lebanon, with a population of 4.5 million people, or 5 million people maximum. At the beginning of the Syrian war, Lebanon has 2 million Syrian refugees. So that, it's half the population were refugees, and a country that actually on its knees because we still haven't recovered from the wars and all these political problems we have in the country. So, and most people don't really come to the UK. Let's just, be clear. Most people stay in neighboring countries, in poor countries. Not everybody cross to the UK. And there are the reasons why people end up here. Some of them, they speak language. Some of them have families. Some of them have connections. Some of them don't know. They pay a smuggler lots of money and they end up here. We don't know one person who came here and when was stopped by the police and arrested on rifle, he asked the police, where are we? And the police said, you're in UK and London. He said, thank you, thank you. He was so happy. I mean, we're talking about, some of them don't know they come here. I think it's really important to remember who those people are. They're human beings. I feel strong about this because I had to flee the war in my country 37 years ago. So I think my stomach turns every time I hear this in the news and I see, today in 2023 in the UK, one of the richest countries in the world, is this what we want to be as a country? Are those the values we stand for? I mean, where are we heading? Who's next? Who's next? We create an Islamic category. We create a group of people that for just the mere fact that they exercise the right to seek protection, asking us for protection. We demonize them. We don't treat them like human beings. And we plan to ship them around the world like some luggage or garbage, whatever. I mean, subcontract our responsibilities to protect people to other countries and punishing people. What is the message you're getting to get? We're trying to punish people who are asking us for protection. I think if you ask me what's going to happen as a result, the impact of this, some people might go underground. Some people might go underground and become more vulnerable. Those people are already vulnerable. They are depressed. A lot of the people actually already self-harm in hotels. I think this will increase. We have people who are mentally, they're on medication because waiting for too long in limbo, not knowing what's happening, not having any information, not having any communication from the office, not having any money, not right to work. It's the impact is enormous. They're going to be even more vulnerable if they go underground, and then they are subject to more exploitation. And what we're doing here is really strengthening or benefiting the business model for the smugglers because they'll find more dangerous routes. And they charge more money to people who are desperate for protection.
Thank you. So I'm really hearing, mental anguish for people that are going to be experiencing this, and how much not only the policies themselves, but also this constant hostility is actually having an impact, and that is a long-term health impact that this bill will have. A huge number of people whose mental health is going to be impacted. And yes, I think that it's really important that you're talking about individual human beings, and then we must never lose sight of that. Zoe's analysis of all the legal provisions of the bill is so important for us to understand it, but really what it comes down to is those individuals. So with that in mind, how can we best do better? I know it's something that, in the sector, the migrant and refugee support sector and across the UK, we are all trying to do better at reflecting those individuals who are impacted in our strategizing, in our work. But how can the voices of people who are impacted, the voices of migrants who are going through this trauma, be fed into the design of delivery and services in London?
I mean, it's very important to give those people voice and to hear them. I think it's important as a good practice for any policy that targets a particular group, that this group is engaged in that policy and listened to. We also sit on a number of working groups, various groups, migrant voice, and sometimes it feels like we're there just for box ticking for this working group that, we've consulted with migrant groups, and we're just there to rubber stamp their decisions, and not every time what we say is taken seriously. I mean, there are times when things have been taken, just to be fair, but a lot of the times, we're not listened to in our view. So I think it's really important that you listen to the sector. And listen, engage, involve those people who are actually going to be impacted by this policy. After all, you're looking for solutions for issues, not creating more problems. I mean, I just also want to say that some local authorities actually went out of their way. When we did our research for our report that we launched recently, we spoke to a number of local authorities to see who else can do anything to help those people. So we find out that, some local authorities like Islington or Lambeth, they allow some secondary areas, housing hotels in the areas to access some of the services. They support some local NGOs to have a drop-in or, at least for those people to have somewhere to go, someone to talk to. We have people who said for a year and a half, I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm on my own all the time. So even providing space for someone to come and have a cup of tea and talk to someone and get any information, it makes a huge difference. So some local authorities are, going out of the way to try to help. And I think there are lots of good practice that local authorities actually can do to support and make people's life better. After all, as we've seen, those people, hopefully most of them are given refugee status, and this is going to be their home, and they want them to start rebuilding their lives. So why damage them more? I think there is a lot we can do. We must do.
Yeah, that's excellent. And yeah, we definitely echoing also what Fiona said about, there are some champion local authorities out there, and I hope that will provide some inspiration to some other ones who can do the same. And yeah, and including people with lived experience in these discussions should not be just an extractive process. I think there's so much value in also just creating a space to forge connections between people and to recognize these people as members of our community. They're here, they live alongside us, and we should be connected to one another. And nobody should be lonely, frankly, in one of these hotels.
In a city like London as well.
Exactly, absolutely. So at this point, I'm going to try and Lucilla, I really do encourage you to sort of come in boldly, because it's always a little bit difficult to bring in someone on the screen, but we've got a little bit more time. I want to leave enough time to also come to maybe some questions that have come in, but got a few minutes now to just, anyone can come in on these questions basically and have a bit of a discussion. So one of the things, and you touched on sort of some of the nationalities and ethnicities of the people who are being impacted by this bill, but I think yeah, there's going to be a disproportionate impact on certain more vulnerable groups. We've heard about the sort of context of hostility and vulnerability and that being exacerbated. So what are the sort of intersectional impacts that the bill is going to have, and especially thinking about migrants with protected characteristics?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm particularly struck by the work of one of our members, Micro Rainbow, who particularly work with migrants with from the LGBT plus community, because they may be coming from countries that you might think are perfectly safe, but of course, if you're from an LGBT background, it's not so. And I think some of these changes will exacerbate that further. For us, it's really important for our members, for ourselves, to be empathetic and to understand that intersectionality, to understand trauma in the way that we run our services, and to take that approach and just listening to you, Nazek, to think about how we as a homelessness sector can hear that voice more strongly and make sure we're understanding fully the extent of the trauma that people who are likely to be impacted by this bill, more likely now to come into the homelessness world, that we can understand better and empathise better, because I think it's going to be something new and different for us, and we need to work together on that. Absolutely.
I can maybe add something really briefly, which is the Home Office has finally published the equality impact assessment of this bill, which shows starkly the many ways in which this bill affects people with protected characteristics. And I won't run through them all, but I think one thing which is really different about this piece of legislation from prior pieces of legislation that we have is that there is a schedule of safe third countries, but there's no individualized assessment about whether it's safe to remove a particular person to a country which the Home Secretary deems safe in general. So although a country might be safe in general on a generalized assessment for that particular person with their particular characteristics, it might be unsafe, but there's no provision to have that kind of individualized assessment under this bill. And that means fundamentally people with protected characteristics which make a particular country unsafe for them could be sent to that country.
That's really important, and I think Nazak rightly pointed out, a lot of Sudanese, a lot of Syrian, a lot of Iranian and Iraqi people will be, the biggest groups maybe. But I think that it's also important when we're talking about recognizing people as individuals that, a big bogey man not allowed to say the word, but many people from Albania do actually need protection as individuals. We need to see them as human beings, singular. And each one of those, and especially, I know, talking protected characteristics, women in particular may have risk factors for return to Albania. And if I'm not wrong, that is designated as a safe country for return under this bill.
Well, under the bill, a person can be returned to it without having their human rights claim assessed either. And there's very clear guidance from the upper tribunal that Albania is not a safe country for many women who are trafficked from Albania, and the Home Office's own country of origin information for Albania accepts that, and accepts that the same conditions can also apply to men who are trafficked from Albania, men and boys.
Absolutely. So I think that that's something that we need to be aware of when we're talking about particularly vulnerable groups. Actually, the entirety of that population is vulnerable by default because they're migrants in the hands of smugglers and traffickers. I think another point, actually, maybe if Lucilla wanted to come in on that point about protected characteristics, or do you think it's covered?
No, I think that it's been covered by colleagues. It's fine. Thank
Great.
you.
Time is absolutely running away from us. I've just spotted. I wanted, Zoe, you have already mentioned that it's not just people coming on boats and who are subject to this bill. So can you just expand very quickly on who the other groups of people are who could be impacted and how this will affect them, or is there any difference?
Yeah, so first of all, it's not just the people who come on boats, it's anyone who comes by means that the Home Office deems to be irregular, which is really wide, who don't have leave to remain, who arrive in the UK on or after the 7th of March. So it has that retrospective effect as well. But the bill also does other things to other migrant communities in the UK. For example, it overturns well-established common law principles that it's for the court to decide whether a period of detention is a reasonable period or not. Instead, the bill says it's up to the Home Secretary to make that decision. It also creates a power, as we were talking about, for the Home Secretary to declare all human rights claims, whether that's for entry or to say that you cannot remove me from the United Kingdom or you must allow me to come to the United Kingdom, all human rights claims of European Economic Area, Swiss and Albanian nationals to be declared inadmissible. And this is something that we have brought to the attention of the EU delegation because it severely impacts the ability of European nationals, amongst others, to make human rights claim to come or not to be removed from the United Kingdom.
Thank you. Given time, I wonder if you can give me a nod. Shall I try to do some questions, or shall I try to bring them back at the end? I'll try to come back to some questions at the end after we've gone to our breakout sessions, but I should give you a couple of minutes just for a quick comfort break now. Thank you very much. And then I believe you've got 3 links. Is that right? You've got 3 links, and now we're going to go to the second link for you to go to your breakout rooms, to the thematic breakout rooms. So some of you will be talking about children and young people. I've got it written down. Children and young people is one of them. Here we go. Modern slavery and exploitation is another, and homelessness and destitution is the last. So click on your second links, but you've got 2 minutes for a quick comfort break. Thanks a lot. And thanks to our panel. It's really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Actually, thank you.